King Richard III.
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 Archaeologists behind the discovery of King Richard III's remains under a car park in Leicester, they were back at the site today to begin work on another new dig.
When scientists began examining the remains believed to belong to King Richard III, they expected confirmation. What they uncovered instead was a revelation, one that cracked open a royal secret buried for more than 5 centuries. Through Y chromosome analysis, researchers discovered something astonishing. There was no genetic link between Richard III and the living male-line descendants of his royal family.
The DNA is telling us. So doing the Y chromosome work, I found that there wasn't a link between Richard III and the male line relatives who are alive today. Getting DNA out of ancient remains is a very tricky and long-winded process.
The DNA pulled from the king's bones was telling a story the history books had kept silent about. A story of deception, hidden deep within the bloodline of England's monarchy. This wasn't about the familiar mystery of the princes in the tower. This was something far more fundamental, a discovery that struck at the very foundation of royal legitimacy itself. For centuries, the right to rule England was based on blood, on an unbroken line of descent from father to son. And Richard's blood was telling a very different, far darker story. A royal grave desecrated by time. For more than 500 years, the final resting place of King Richard III was a mystery wrapped in rumor and legend. History records that Richard died at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, the final decisive clash of the Wars of the Roses. Accounts claimed his body was taken to Leicester and buried without ceremony at the Grey Friars Friary. But as time passed, the friary was destroyed, its location forgotten. Some even whispered that his bones had been dug up and thrown into a river. By the modern era, Richard III's grave was believed to be lost forever. Until 2012. That year, a team of archaeologists began digging in an unlikely location, a city council car park in Leicester. Old maps suggested the friary once stood there, buried beneath centuries of development and asphalt. Expectations were low. No one truly believed they would find anything significant. Then, within days, they uncovered a skeleton. It lay precisely where historical records placed the friary's choir, the exact spot where Richard III was said to have been buried. Labeled simply Skeleton 1, the remains immediately raised eyebrows. The individual was male, early 30s. Richard was 32 when he died. The bones bore the unmistakable scars of violence, at least 10 wounds, including 8 to the skull. These injuries were consistent with sword and halberd strikes, and some suggested the helmet had been ripped away in his final moments, leaving his head exposed. Contemporary accounts of his brutal death suddenly felt disturbingly accurate. Then came the spine. The skeleton showed severe scoliosis, a dramatic S-shaped curve that would have caused one shoulder to sit noticeably higher than the other. Chroniclers of Richard's time had noted his uneven shoulders, a detail later grotesquely exaggerated by William Shakespeare into the image of a twisted hunchback villain. The bones told a different story. Richard was not deformed, not monstrous, but he did carry a significant physical condition that would have been impossible to hide. Radiocarbon dating placed the remains firmly in the late 15th century. Chemical analysis of the teeth revealed a diet rich in expensive meats and seafood, food fit only for the elite. Everything aligned. Everything except certainty. To prove this was truly Richard III, scientists needed more than historical alignment and skeletal clues. They needed the one thing that does not lie. DNA. A royal scandal exposed. Extracting DNA from bones buried for over 5 centuries is a scientific gamble. Ancient DNA is fragile, easily contaminated and often degraded beyond use. But if it worked, it would settle one of history's greatest mysteries once and for all. Researchers focused on two genetic markers passed down through generations with remarkable consistency: mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome. First came mitochondrial DNA, which is passed exclusively from mother to child. That meant scientists could trace Richard's maternal line through his sister, Anne of York. Genealogists followed this line across 19 generations and more than 500 years, eventually locating two living descendants: Michael Ibsen, a furniture maker in London, and Wendy Doldig, a researcher in Canada. When the results came back, the match was perfect. The mitochondrial DNA from the skeleton was identical to theirs. The statistical odds of coincidence were astronomical. In February 2013, the University of Leicester made the announcement. Beyond reasonable doubt, the remains were those of King Richard III. Case closed? Not even close. Because mitochondrial DNA was only half the story. The other half would ignite a scandal no one saw coming. The bloodline break. Next came the Y chromosome, the genetic marker passed directly from father to son. In theory, Richard III's Y chromosome should match that of living men descended from the male Plantagenet line. Researchers traced these descendants back to Edward III and tested members of the Somerset family, recognized male line heirs. The results stunned everyone. There was no match. Richard III's Y chromosome did not align with that of his supposed male relatives. Instead of confirming the lineage, the test exposed what scientists call a false paternity event, a moment in history when a recorded father was not the biological one. In plain terms, somewhere along the royal family tree, an affair had occurred. A secret child had been passed off as legitimate, and the bloodline had been broken. The implications were explosive. This wasn't just a distant genealogical curiosity. If the break occurred early enough, perhaps with one of Edward III's own sons, it could mean entire generations of English kings ruled without a true biological claim. Alternatively, the break may have occurred later, within the line of the modern descendants tested, meaning Richard himself may have been legitimate while others were not. The truth is devastatingly elusive. What made this revelation so powerful was the historical irony. The Wars of the Roses, a 30-year conflict that drenched England in blood, were fought over competing claims of legitimacy between the houses of York and Lancaster. Both sides traced their ancestry back to Edward III. Thousands died arguing over who had the rightful claim to the throne. And now, modern science suggests the idea of a pure, unbroken Plantagenet bloodline may have been a fiction all along. They may have been fighting over a crown neither side genetically owned. A king reclaimed from myth. While historians debated royal legitimacy, the bones themselves told another story, one that stripped away centuries of propaganda. Richard III was not the twisted villain of Shakespeare's stage. His scoliosis did not cripple him. His skeleton showed strong muscle attachments, evidence of a physically capable warrior. He fought on foot, led men into battle, and died facing his enemies. Isotopic analysis revealed the life he lived. As a child, he moved frequently, reflecting political instability. As king, his diet changed dramatically. Luxury meats, rare birds, fine seafood, and alcohol in staggering amounts, up to a bottle of wine per day. This was not speculation. This was chemistry. Using 3D scans, forensic artists reconstructed his face from the skull. What emerged was startling: a composed, intelligent man bearing a striking resemblance to contemporary portraits. DNA suggested blue eyes and fair hair that darkened with age. For the first time in 500 years, the world could look into the face of Richard III, not a monster, not a caricature, but a human being. Finally, the bones recorded his death. 11 wounds, 9 to the head, 2 instantly fatal. One blade pierced the base of the skull, another cleaved away bone. His helmet had been torn off. He was surrounded, overwhelmed, killed in brutal close combat. Afterward, his body was stripped, humiliated, and buried hastily beneath what would one day become a parking lot. And yet those bones, broken and forgotten, told the truth. The victors wrote the history, but the bones wrote the truth. If royal blood itself is built on a secret, what does that mean for the idea of divine right and the legitimacy of power? Let us know your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.